In 1996, the Disney Animation Studio gave the world a dark children's film that rang clear with its call for justice.
In 2022, we returned to Kentucky to try a podcast favorite brand.
The film is The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
The whiskey is Rebel Cask Strength.
And we'll review them both. This is
the Film and Whiskey Podcast. Welcome to the Film and Whiskey Podcast, where each week we review a classic movie and a glass of whiskey. I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And this week we are looking at the 1996 Walt Disney animated classic, The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Ha 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 ha.
Dude, I'm telling you, for the last 4 days since we watched this movie, I've just been walking around the house going, It's just maybe the most epic music ever in a Disney movie. Like, it's this and The Lion King.
I feel like Tom Haverford's idea for a belt that plays like an intro song every time you walk into a room. You would get the choral piece from this playing on that.
Absolutely, I would.
Bob just walks into the room. Ha ha ha.
All right, man. So let's give some context here for people who just are first tuning into our podcast and hear us making dumb noises.
I hope that this is somebody's first.
I do too.
Experience of the film.
I really do. So we are in season 5 of our podcast, and for 4 seasons, we have watched a bunch of movies that are, ostensibly classics.
Mostly crappy movies that Bob picked.
This season,
according to my wife.
Right. This season, we threw caution to the wind, and we said, hey, let's watch a bunch of movies that we never hear talked about on podcasts, movies that may or may not actually be good, movies that we remember liking when we were younger and we want to revisit. And that's kind of what we're doing. So this week is one of my movies. Oh, go ahead, Brad.
And then after we finalized that list, we unfinalized it, switched things around a little bit, and here we are with The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yeah, it's a living document, It's like the Constitution. So this is one of my picks for season 5. It's a movie that I don't think I saw as a child. There were a couple. Disney did, they had their incredible run in the early 90s. And then in the mid 90s, you had Pocahontas, followed by Hunchback, followed by Hercules. And I felt like that's where everyone kind of agreed, like, oh, maybe they've peaked and they're starting to taper off a little bit. I have no memory of seeing Pocahontas all the way through as a child. Like, I remember Colors of the Wind, but that's it. I have no memory of seeing any of this movie, and I'm pretty sure I didn't see Hercules until sometime in the past year. And so, as I was going on my movie-watching journey, Brad, over the last year, I watched Hercules and I watched this movie, and this one just hit me like, oh my gosh, why have I not seen this before, and why does no one talk about this movie? So I'm really, really pumped to discuss it today.
Yeah, I'm with you, dude. I feel like I have vague memories of Pocahontas, and I've never seen Hunchback or Hercules. So I'm with you, dude. These later 90s Disney films, they didn't quite hit the same spot as like Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast did for me.
No, they definitely didn't. And I feel like, again, like most of the world kind of recognizes that these do not reach the heights of, say, The Lion King or Beauty and the Beast. This one is kind of right there for me. And there are very specific reasons for that, but I think at the end of the day, the very first thing we need to say about this movie is that this is maybe the darkest and most adult Disney movie I've ever seen, Brad.
Dude, I'll just say this. The movie opens with this magister judge guy chasing down a gypsy woman till she falls on the steps of Notre Dame, cracks her neck, and dies.
And then
he grabs the bundle that she was carrying, ostensibly stolen goods. No, it's a baby. And he immediately goes, oh my God, it's horrific, a la Elephant Man. And he looks around, sees a well. He's about to drop that thing in the well. Like,
oh yeah.
Yeah, welcome to
it's a banger.
Welcome to the beauty that is Paris in the 1800s, apparently.
So I think as we go on, we're going to be making some very obvious comparisons to other movies that we've watched on this podcast. And probably the most obvious of all of them is going to be Les Miserables, because the source material for The Hunchback of Notre Dame, it's a novel by Victor Hugo, who also wrote Les Miserables. And it is, in many places, just as miserable as Les Miserables.
If they had gotten Russell Crowe to play the Magister in this, Frollo, that it would have just been perfect.
But only if he sang the whole thing.
Yeah, obviously. Come on.
All right. So, Brad, knowing that you had not seen this movie before, let's go ahead and move into Brad Explains. This is the part of the podcast where Brad breaks down the movie he has just seen, often for the first time. You've already given us a lovely synopsis of the opening of the movie, but do you think that you can explain the whole film in 60 seconds or less?
Probably not, dude. There's so much
lots
packed
of
into
intrigue.
this
Yeah.
hour-and-a-half long, supposedly children's film, but I'll do my best.
All right.
The Hunchback of Notre Dame is a movie about a bell ringer who is physically deformed. If you didn't guess it already, he has a hunched back. And he is raised by this judge named Frollo, who is evil and gaslights the heck out of him and tells him that he's the only friend that he has in the world. Then he goes out into the world and it's proven true. Everybody treats him like garbage, except for this gypsy girl who's really nice to him. She gets in trouble with Frollo, but begs for sanctuary. Her and the hunchback become friends. He helps her escape, and then they burn down the city trying to find her. They find her back at the cathedral. All sorts of crazy stuff happens, and Frollo dies. And Gypsy Girl falls in love with not the hunchback because he's ugly, but with a really hot captain of the guard.
Boom.
So moral of the story is be attractive.
That's the moral of every story.
Pretty much anyone coming out of Hollywood.
All right, man. So you hadn't seen this movie before. I'm very new to seeing this movie. There are lots of things I want to discuss because I am just absolutely wowed by this movie. I think maybe we should start like feeding off of what I was saying earlier with the comparison to Les Mis. And I like Les Mis a lot. And I think that especially for like being a person of faith, like Les Mis just hits me in a very particular way. And this movie does too. But I think objectively speaking, this movie's an hour shorter than Les Mis. And
thankfully,
it has its faults for being short, and I think kind of like breezing by things and Disney-fying a lot of things too. But it just moves with such a great pace. And I guess I kind of just want to talk about like comparing this to Les Mis, Brad. What do you think works best about this movie being as short as it is? An animated movie. Like, does this medium fit like the Victor Hugo of it all?
I'm just so happy that they didn't film it as a live musical with people singing on set. The fact that the singing performances are actually good in this movie makes me very happy. No, dude, I think that animation, when taken seriously, really, like, genuinely has an opportunity to tug at the heartstrings in ways that live action maybe can't always. Mm-hmm. You're able to create some, I don't know, just more out of this world situations and what the characters are able to do and where they're able to go. That, I don't know, I think it can actually be pretty cool to see a world like what Victor Hugo has created in 1800s Paris in animation. So I think it's fine to be animated. I think marketing it as a children's film is the interesting part.
Yeah, so that's a note that I took. This is one of the few films that I would say, on paper is a children's movie, but that really isn't a children's movie, and I'm okay with that. I think a lot of times, when they try too much, I think I've talked about it on the podcast before, but the movie Soul from Pixar, I liked that movie. I would probably give it like a 7.5 out of 10. But I have no desire to ever watch that with my kids because it's so like contemplative and it's about the meaning of life. And there's just very little in there for young children to latch onto. And this one is pretty much the same way. And yet I feel like this movie serves a very particular purpose in that, like, if I had a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-old that I wanted to start introducing to some of these deeper themes of racism and like cultural sins and things like that. I'm not going to sit them down in front of Les Mis, but this would be the kind of movie that I think does have a purpose and a place. And honestly, like once you keep that in mind, I actually really like that Disney kind of went all in on not necessarily being true to the source material, but at least being true to the themes that they were trying to project.
Yeah, and those themes, they really do occupy such an important part in our culture. And when you start talking about the role of religion as it interacts with the state, and you start discussing, what it means as the church grows so opulent and large, I don't know, Bob. The church occupies an interesting place in this movie because it doesn't necessarily, I wouldn't call it evil in any sense. If anything, it's just the fact that the church is attended by everyone in the city that makes the church feel bad. But the Bishop of Notre Dame, welcomes in the gypsies. He protects them and shelters them to the best of his ability. It's really the churchgoers and Frollo who are the evil ones. So I don't feel like they are representative of the church, though.
I don't think so either. And I think you're getting at a lot of the themes that are probably going to come up a little bit later as we get into analysis of this movie. I think maybe for now, like let's pull back a little bit. Let's set the context of the movie. Because I do want to just get into talking about how freaking awesome the opening to this movie is. It is just epic is the only word that really describes it. But as I get into that, let me just go back to talking about my year-long odyssey of watching movies last year. I really filled in a lot of gaps in my movie watching history, and a lot of those were Disney movies. And what I realized was I would watch a few Disney movies in a row, and they would all be from kind of like the same time period. And what it would be is like a movie that was really, really artistic and serious. And you could tell that like the Disney company was pouring lots of resources into and wanted to be taken seriously. And then like the next movie they would release would be something that was like a complete pendulum swing into like silly and cheap looking and not very good. And I think like, so for example, I watched Bambi for the first time, I think ever last year. Again, another one of those movies where it's like, oh, this works so much better as a grown-up than it ever did as a kid. And the animation is like out of this world, insanely beautiful. And then I'm like, all right, I guess I'll watch Dumbo. And I watched Dumbo and I was like, oh, this is one of the worst films I've ever seen. Like, I truly hate that movie. It was awful.
Also, a movie children probably should not watch.
Completely agree.
but
like it's terrifying, it's poorly made, and then like with 80 years or whatever of historical stuff that's happened since then, it does not hold up well. It's kind of offensive. Like there's just nothing redeeming about that movie. And like I kind of experienced that on a smaller scale here because I watched this and then I watched Hercules like right after it. And Hercules is one of those movies where the plot or like the script feels unfinished. It's very slight. It's silly. It's not trying to be much more than that. I didn't think the animation was anywhere near on the level of this. And so it's just really interesting to watch how even into the 90s, Disney would like take a really big swing. Like they came off of The Lion King and they're like, all right, we're going to do Pocahontas. It's going to be incredible. And then that kind of had a tepid response. And they were like, all right, we're going to do Hunchback and it's going to be incredible. And that kind of had a tepid response. And then they reset to let's do something silly and do Hercules. But I still kind of respect that more than what I see Disney doing now, which is like, how do we make the safest possible movie? And I texted this to you during the film, Brad. Like, nothing about this movie screams safe or like bankable to me. And I really appreciate that about it.
Yeah, there is an essence of balance in the theater industry, right? Like a lot of actors will sign on with these big studios and they'll say, all right, I'll give you, 1 or 2 or 3 of your blockbuster movies if you in turn, fund my little indie project that I want to work on with this, up and coming writing duo or director or something like that. You see Nolan do this with the Batman trilogy. He tells Warner Brothers, hey, I'm going to make you guys the coolest Batman movies that will ever exist. Third one's not going to be great, but don't worry about it. Everybody's just going to talk about the second one. And from there on out, you gotta fund something like Inception or Interstellar. And obviously he's, now one of the most famous directors of all time. But when you see studios willing to fund artistic projects, I think you get really important artifacts of our culture. And it, like you said, when you just play it safe all the time, when the bottom line is the only thing you care about, which is what it feels like Disney only cares about, you don't get a lot of shots taken. You don't get a lot of, I don't know, people just don't take chances. And that's sad. Like, you got to put yourself out there.
When I was watching, so I watched this movie the other night to prep for the podcast, and I followed it up with their new movie Encanto, which, you know, it's beautifully animated just because of what computers can do now. But like tonally, that movie was all over the place. I thought the songs were kind of a mess. And Lin-Manuel Miranda wrote the songs. So I'm sure that there are people mad at me right now just for saying that the songs are a mess. But watching this movie and then watching Encanto, I was like, oh my gosh, Encanto had maybe 30 minutes worth of plot that they stretched out to 90 minutes. And the songs were really cleverly like syncopated. The rhythms were interesting, but there wasn't any substance to like any of them. And this movie, like the first note I took was every single song in this movie is epic as fuck. Like that was the first note I took. Because like it starts out with that incredible choir hitting those notes. It moves into Latin. Like there's tons of Latin singing in this. And when Frollo is chasing down Quasimodo's mom, they're singing Dies Irae, which is Latin for the Day of Wrath. And, you know, it's like this intense music. But even when you get the English song, you know, the English language songs, when Quasimodo is first singing his kind of big I Want song, which is called Out There, you know, he's talking about what it's like to be people outside. And like the line that he says is that they're heedless of the gift it is to be them. And it's just like the turns of phrase in this movie are so, so beautiful. And you can tell that it has some of the same team working on it that worked on The Lion King and worked on Beauty and the Beast, because Brad, I just think the songs are so well written.
Well, and that's an issue, right? Nowadays, it just feels so rare to find any musicals with real substance and with genuinely like witty, interesting writing going on in them. And I'm with you, dude. I think some of the writing in this movie just leaves you speechless. And can we talk for a second about my boy Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart just ripping it up as the Hunchback of Notre Dame?
Yeah, Tom Hulse, who is an actor that does not crop up very often on this podcast. We reviewed Amadeus way back in, I think, season 1. And here he is voicing the Hunchback.
Yeah, he had a big time. Amadeus was late 80s or early 90s?
84.
Oh,
so
84.
We're talking a 12-year gap between podcast appearances here.
Yeah, that's quite a bit of time, more than I thought. I really love his acting in this performance. It gives Quasimodo a youthfulness and a lightness of tone that I think the movie desperately needs, because everything else in this movie is really dark and really, I don't know, damning. Like, it's just all so hard to swallow sometimes that in the middle of that, you just have this really bright, joyful presence that Tom Hulse brings about that I was very thankful for as I was watching it. I don't know. How did you feel his performance helped or hindered the movie?
You like to use a word a lot on here to describe people's performances, and that is earnest. And I think that's this is the encapsulation of that. This is a voice performance that is meant to convey a character who is not simple-minded, but naive and trusting when he shouldn't be, and curious and childlike and just very earnest. Like, he is a very straightforward, innocent character. And I think that a lot of times voice actors that try to convey that can come across too childish, or it just rings hollow, it rings false. It doesn't with this performance. I think his performance is fantastic, man. I also think that Kevin Kline as the Captain Phoebus is really, really good in this movie. And I actually texted you while we were watching it. Like, he is totally leaning into like the Harrison Ford Han Solo-ness of this role. And I think he really nailed it.
Yeah, I honestly, dude, I know the name Kevin Kline. What else is he from? What is he in?
I mean, he's an Oscar winner for A Fish Called Wanda back in the 80s. I mean, he's been in, if you just look up Kevin Kline, like you'll recognize his face. He's been in a ton of stuff.
Okay. Yeah, I really liked Phoebus a lot. As a character, he adds just a little bit of nuance between the ruling class and those being oppressed. And I like that they have him show his sympathy early on, but he still takes the job. He still becomes the captain of the guard. But as his conscience continually kind of gets in the way of doing what Frollo is asking him to do, the journey that you see him go on, I think is really well written and really interesting. And I think Kevin Kline does a great job of illustrating that.
Now, on the other hand, Disney was really swinging for the fences with some of the celebrities that they got to voice their projects in the mid to late 90s. So, the year before this, Toy Story goes, bananas at the box office with Tom Hanks and Tim Allen. So they're like, hey, let's get one of the biggest female stars in the world to come voice this performance for us. And so they got Demi Moore, who was huge at the time. And Demi Moore, not the most compelling voice actor, if I'm being honest here. I think that, if there is a weak link among the voice cast, it's Esmeralda. Yeah,
there was just a few moments where it felt like she was almost in the recording booth and somebody said her name through the window, and while recording her line, she kind of looked to the side and then she lost all tone, and then she kind of came back in and got back into it, and and they were just okay, that's good enough. We're going to use that. And I'm like, it feels like there was a better take of that line than what you put in the movie.
I mean, if you ever watch a YouTube clip of people recording for movies like this, like a Tom Hanks or a Tim Allen, Tom Hanks talks about how he would go home at the end of the day after recording Toy Story and he would just be drained and exhausted because you have to be so much more over the top with your voice than you would ever be in a real life situation. You're trying to convey all that emotion and people can't see your face and they can't see your mannerisms. And so he's just flailing around in there. And I think even more than when you're in front of a camera, you're in this recording booth and you have to mentally construct the whole world that your character's supposed to be inhabiting. You're just pretending really hard. And I think that it's hard to do. And when you have an actress like Demi Moore, who is a pretty good actress on screen, and they don't nail it with their voice performances, it really does kind of stick out like a sore thumb.
Especially when you have performances like whoever the heck played Frollo, who was just perfectly over the top in every way that we needed him to be.
Listen, man, I'm telling you, I don't know if you've invested in any sort of sound system for your TV yet, but I got just a very basic sound bar and subwoofer last year, and my guy Frollo was the bass in his voice was rumbling in my living room, and it was just glorious.
Isn't this one new? It's awfully good. Looks very much like the gypsy girl. I know. You helped her escape. But now all Paris is burning because of you.
She was kind to me, Master.
You idiot! That wasn't kindness, it was cunning. She's a gypsy. Gypsies are not capable of real love. Think, boy. Think of your mother.
The actor's name is Tony Jay. He actually has been on this podcast before, Brad. He is the guy in Beauty and the Beast named Monsieur Dark, who owns the asylum.
Yeah, he's the asylum guy. Yeah. Dude, as soon as he started talking, I was like, oh, it's the asylum guy from Beauty and the Beast.
Oh, he's so good in this movie.
Yeah, dude, he has literally 2 lines in Beauty and the Beast, but I immediately was like, oh, yep, that's that guy.
Yep. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the movie itself, Brad, because I really loved it. I recognize that it's dark, but it is, again, on paper, a children's movie. And I think the way that they try to make it a children's movie is the inclusion of these gargoyles who come to life and talk to Quasimodo. Now, I am on record saying things like, I don't know that the comic relief characters who are intended for children are always the best idea. Even in The Lion King, as much as I love Timon and Pumbaa, That movie is a very, very different movie when Simba is running away and dying in the desert. And then all of a sudden they're like, all right, this is getting way too dark. We got to lighten this up. And they do it by introducing these two new characters. And the movie just takes a complete left turn into being kind of silly for 17 minutes or however long. This movie, I feel like, is the most extreme version of that because it's like Whiplash. Like, you're watching people like starving to death in the streets of France, and then there's Quasimodo up on the tower, and you have, Jason Alexander from Seinfeld cracking one-liners at him. And like, so I will say this though, I don't think the gargoyles work, but I think the fact that they kind of leave it open-ended as to whether Quasimodo is just imagining them because he has no one to talk to kind of softens the blow a little bit. I did like that touch.
Yeah, the fact that they never reveal themselves to any other character, to me, is one of the smarter decisions that they made in the movie. Just to say, you know what, like, these are here for the kids. They're for the, like, 7 kids who watch this movie. We want them to laugh and have a good time with the slapstick comedy. And then the rest of it is going to be just primarily adult content.
Mm-hmm. All right, so did you feel like the gargoyles worked though, or no?
No, they're terrible. Honestly, I mean, there's a few lines that are funny, but even they had to steal a line from Aladdin to make the one gargoyle funny at one point. He's sitting there and he goes, "I'm losing to a bird."
Yeah.
And I'm like, you can't just rip off Robin Williams like that.
Well, and then they do the obligatory like pop culture reference, right? When the one gargoyle is sending out the birds in Wizard of Oz, and they even play the Wizard of Oz music. I'm like, what is this? Like, you didn't have to do that. Yeah, I'm with you, man.
If anything, the only gargoyle I didn't mind was kind of the posh one.
Mm-hmm.
He was actually a little bit amusing to me because he was so sincere. Like, the other two just felt snarky and just I just didn't enjoy them at all. I think that if you had the gargoyles come to life as friends for him to talk to, and they were occasionally bumbling, tag-along sidekick kind of friends, I genuinely think that could have worked for this movie. They just took it to a level that it's just kind of untenable.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think that if there is a major flaw with the way this movie's put together, it's that. I will say, though, if you took the gargoyles out of this movie, I do think it would get to a point where I was like, all right, it's too much. Like, it's too dark. Yep. And it really gets to a question that I kind of want to talk to you about in the second half. As much as I love this movie, you kind of have to ask the question, like, did they make a mistake in choosing this source material as a Disney movie? Like, what I think we have here is the best possible version of what they could have done with this material. And if you go on like Wikipedia and look up the ending of the book, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, very different than than what Disney chose to go with. But it just kind of begs the question, like, if you have to shoehorn in these gargoyles, like, should you have just made something else, And so I think that's going to be a good topic of conversation in the second half. But Brad, I think it's time for us to hit pause right here and try this whiskey. What do you say we get into this Rebel Cask Strength?
I am all in, Bob. Let's do it.
All right. So today we are checking out Rebel Cask Strength Single Barrel. So this is from one single barrel. Brad, I know that we've gone over this. I know.
No.
I know.
Dude, they're so smart over there in the whiskey industry.
Speaking of smart things they do to trick people, I was just going to go into this. I think we've been over this terminology before, but this is called cask strength. It's not called barrel proof. It's not called anything else. And there's a reason that these slightly different terms exist in the world of whiskey. Cask strength whiskeys can be diluted, so it's not taken directly from the barrel. It's not barrel proof. It is bottled at a strength that you could theoretically find a barrel proof whiskey at. That's why it's called cask strength. So this clocks in at 120 proof. It's a nice round number. So, they dilute it down to from whatever it was from down to 120 so that they can only have to make one label, and it's always at 120 proof. So they only do a little bit of dilution, but this is not taken like directly from the barrel. That's the difference between barrel proof and cask strength.
And boy, can you tell.
Man,
These
taking
jokers
taking
think
it
they
from
know what they're
123
doing.
to 120 made a world of difference. No, listen, we love Rebel around here ever since season 1. And just a few weeks ago, we did the 100 proof. I'm really pumped to do Cask Strength. We're a fan of what LuxCo is doing with this. I know it's sourced from Heaven Hill, so I guess we're fans of whatever Heaven Hill's doing with this. Brad, you picked up this bottle. You were generous enough to give me a sample of it. I'll let you go first here. As we get into nosing, tasting this, what are you picking up on this Rebel Cask Strength?
Yeah, I hope you enjoyed that quarter ounce I gave you. For me, the nose here is spectacular. Cherry, salted caramel, cola, oak, a little bit of spiciness. I'm getting it all here. I really, really like what they're doing. For me, it's a 9 out of 10.
Yeah, I like this a lot too. I'm not going to be quite as high on it as you because it's not a super complex nose. Even though like all the notes you're talking about, I picked up on this. It still just kind of comes across as a very well-made weeded bourbon, which it is. For me, it was like cola with orange in it. There's actually, back when I was in college, we took a trip to Germany and they have Coca-Cola makes a product there called Mezzo Mix, which is just like Coke with orange. And it is fantastic. But I took a sniff of this and I was like, it's Mezzo Mix. Of course. So it was cola, as you do. It was cola, it's orange, and then I got a little bit of oak, a really, really nice weeded bourbon. I'm going to give it an 8 on the nose.
And then you get into the actual flavor. I think it came down a little bit for me. The flavor simplifies from the nose. Mm-hmm. And it just hits it's caramel, it's oak, it's vanilla, and there's a little bit of hint of that fruity cola-ness. I kind of lost the cherry on the flavor, but you still just get that general sweetness, that sugary sweetness you get from a cola. I still like it a lot. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, man. Again, it's bright orange for me, a little bit of caramel, a little bit of vanilla, a little bit of oak. It's I don't know what the word is. Like, it's not a heavy hitter. It's just consistent. It's like constantly getting on base. Like, it is the Moneyball of cask strength whiskeys. You know what I mean? Like, not always hitting a home run, but it gets on base.
We've plugged the numbers into the system, and Sabermetrics tells us this is the exact whiskey you need to drink.
Absolutely. So I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10.
And for our finish, this is where the whiskey suffers for me, which I hate to say. It's almost got like this slightly sour spiciness to it. And then there's a lot of oak going on. It's not a bad finish. There's still some of the nice flavors from earlier coming through, but those were the prominent notes for me. So I'm dropping down to a 7 out of 10.
See, I really like the finish, and I don't disagree with anything you're saying, but because I think the nose and the taste kind of prepped me for this to be more of a like crowd pleaser than some sort of spiritual experience. Like I dug the finish. And as it's kind of sat here and developed in the glass for me, Brad, I just took one more sip and this thing is like an old fashioned in a glass, but just whiskey. Like it has some almost like black licorice-y notes that I would get from the bitters I use when I make an old fashioned. It has that cherry, like a brandied cherry to it. It has the orange. And I'm like, of course, I was picking up all these notes and I wasn't putting it together. This whiskey is an old fashioned in my Glencairn, and I really, really love it. I'm going to give it an 8.5 on the finish.
Yeah, no, I actually think that is a good call. It has those old fashioned qualities. Overall, I think the balance is fine. It definitely started off phenomenal and came down a bit by the end. I'll give it a 7 out of 10 on the balance. It's so nice up front, but it just misses on the end for me.
I think it's been a while since I've been this much more enthusiastic about a whiskey than you, but I think I'm going to give the finish a 9 out of 10. Again, I think like just kind of categorizing it in that crowd pleaser category, this is hitting on all cylinders for me. And it's, a darn good nose, a darn good taste, a darn good finish. And none of them were like overly harsh. None of them stuck out from the rest. I think it's a really well-rounded whiskey. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10.
And that gets us into our value category. Now, this is a pretty hard whiskey to find, Bob. I know you'd been looking for it for a long time. For me, finding it for $60 A friend and I split the cost of the bottle, so I paid $30 for half a bottle of this. At $60, I think it just, with the whiskey just missing a little bit on the finish for me, I think $60 is a decent amount of money for a sourced cask strength product, but it's still a decent value. I'll give it a 6 out of 10.
All right, so I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10, and I have a lot of reasons for it, but at $60, I'm trying to think of like cask strength whiskeys I can get, right? So, I mean, you've got your Wild Turkey rare breed at like 45, and that's never going to be beat. But I really like Four Roses Small Batch Select. That's $60. I really like, Old Forester 1920. That's $60. Like everything that I like that is kind of in this proof point is about $60. And I think the thing that really puts it over the edge for me is when we talk about wheated bourbons, like the main competitor here, on paper at least, because it's not like this with the secondary, but this is supposed to stand up against a Weller Full Proof. And Brad, you and I were not huge fans of Weller Full Proof. We actually suggested just sticking with Weller Antique because the Full Proof, I think, is only like 7 proof points higher. So that one at like 114 and this one at 120, I think it's like a night and day difference, man. And you're definitely not going to be spending, less than $60 on Weller Full Proof unless you're Brad G and you win it in a lottery for $50. But so Brad, you have both these bottles on your shelf right now. If I gave you a pour of each, which one do you prefer?
Oof. Honestly, I think the Full Proof.
Oh man, really?
Yeah, the Full Proof there's something about the middle and end of that whiskey that I like a little more than this.
Well, damn, I thought I was going to really drive the nail in the coffin of your argument, and that backfired spectacularly.
Yeah. Honestly, I could go sit down right now and pour them both out and give them a try.
I'm going to let you do that as we get into the second half of the episode and just give notes. But for me, at least, this is easier to find than Full Proof is. I know it's still kind of hard to track down, Brad, but it's more readily available. It's only $60. There's not a huge secondary market trying to flip these. It's a 9 out of 10 value for me. And that's bringing my final score out to a very impressive 42.5. Brad, what are you at?
I'm at a 37 out of 50.
Wow, so we were quite a ways away. That brings us out to a 79.5 out of 100 or a 39.75 out of 50. So we're right under that 40 mark, but I think we're pretty firmly in the yes, I would recommend trying and yes, I would recommend buying camp. Am I wrong in saying that?
No. 100% recommend. For me, I mean, a 37 out of 50 for either of us is a really solid score. So I am firmly in the camp of, yep, go buy a bottle. This is really good whiskey. And honestly, I feel like we've been kind of spoiled lately. We've had a lot of really good whiskeys on the podcast lately. So maybe that reflected a little bit on my score here.
Yeah. Well, Brad, I think we paired it pretty well again with another really good movie, which is like, it's from a studio that's known for crowd pleasers. It's trying to do something a little bit more. And I appreciate that effort, if nothing else. So what do you say we get back into talking about that movie, The Hunchback of Notre Dame? All right, that was Rebel Cask Strength. We're getting back into talking about The Hunchback. And Brad, as I think back to the first half of this episode, I hope that we're not making it sound like this is just a dour, downbeat movie, because it's not. Like, I think that from a filmmaking technique, the animation is gorgeous in this movie. Like, and we're going to get into one of your picks later this season, The Prince of Egypt, which is another film that, I've watched recently, and it just like, I was gobsmacked at how incredible the compositions in that movie are. And I think it's the same here. This is truly some of Disney's just best work ever when it comes especially to traditional animation.
Can I actually disagree with you?
Oh,
right there?
What? Really?
There are parts of this movie that are beautifully illustrated. I think anytime Notre Dame is in the foreground or the background, or you're inside the bell towers, there's a lot of beautiful animation going on. But anytime the camera was like above the city streets, there was no depth of field that like allowed you to gain a sense of perspective on what was happening in the streets. And I noticed it right at the start of the movie as the camera's like coming in through the skies, and then it kind of comes in on top of the buildings. the ground literally looks flat, and the people walking on it, you can tell that you're supposed to see them like walking towards the camera a little bit, but it was one of the most poorly animated. Like, honestly, it felt like when Dwight is looking at Pam's picture and he's like, where's the, what does he say? Where's the horizon line or whatever it is? And he's like, you can't even tell where it is. Like, that's what I felt like watching.
Yeah,
this.
I think he's like, why is it lit from both? Why are there two suns? Like,
yeah. We're not on Tatooine.
That's really funny. I do disagree on, I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I'm talking like from a shot composition standpoint. Like, there are some of the most beautiful, take a still frame and put it online as one perfect shot, because they just put a lot of thought into the compositions, I felt like.
No, I'm with you. I think that a lot of those compositions are what led me to what I enjoyed most about the movie, which was simply watching Quasimodo leap and bound and climb all over the cathedral. Like, for me, that was one of the most fun elements of this movie, was just watching him with pure joy leaping and bounding across this gargantuan piece of architecture that was so beautifully illustrated. Mm-hmm. I don't know about you, man, but like, it almost had some like Assassin's Creed like vibes to it, of like, this dude's just getting it and it's awesome.
So the funny thing about that is I was just about to make the most polar opposite comparison ever. But one of my favorite movies, just from like a pure cinematography and like visuals standpoint, is The Sound of Music. Like, that movie is just gorgeous to look at. And in the very first scene, when Julie Andrews is up on the hill and, spinning around, she goes back into this little kind of like, patch of trees, and she's like weaving in and out of them. And the way that shot is filmed, like, I could tell that there was a direct reference to that shot in this movie the first time we see Quasimodo like weaving in and out of the pillars of Notre Dame. And I'm like, Gary Truesdale, the director, I'm like, I got you. I see what you're doing, and I appreciate it. Like, just that one really hit me. I was like, thank you for the Sound of Music reference, my friend. Brad, and on that note, Brad, getting back to the fact that I hope we're not portraying this movie as like really downbeat and dour, I think there's a lot of fun to be had in this movie. Like, are the themes adult and can they be heavy? Absolutely. But for me, watching the filmmaking technique was like, it was like the most fun I've had watching a Disney movie in forever. And I think that, like, for the average viewer, there's going to be things in this movie that are just really entertaining. Like, getting back to what you were just talking about. I love the fact that this movie just basically ends with a giant siege on Notre Dame Cathedral, like a Helm's Deep type. We are going to just hurl things at each other, and it's an action movie for 10 minutes. I was not expecting that. And honestly, it's really well done action filmmaking. So there are just parts of this film that I feel like are truly 10 out of 10. And then there's like the gargoyle stuff. And it's like, did you have to do that? I don't know, Brad, before we give final scores, is there any other part of this movie, themes from this movie, that you think are worth diving into a little bit?
There's certain things that I kind of want to nitpick a little bit, but as far as the thematic resonance of this movie, it really finds its core in this idea of who are the outcasts and why are they treated so poorly? And what makes them any different than, the people who have cast them out? And so in the middle of the film, you just get this beautiful song as Esmeralda takes sanctuary in Notre Dame, where she examines, like, these people coming to church have evil in their hearts towards me, and I can't figure out why. And I don't remember the exact line, but there's that moment where she's looking up at Jesus, and she basically says, I think that you were probably more of an outcast like me. Mm-hmm. And bro, that got me going.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing too. Like, again, this is the sister companion film to Les Miserables, and that was all about, like, where would Jesus be among this situation? Would he be with Javert? Would he be with Valjean and Fantine and the downtrodden? And
oh no, it's Jean Valjean.
What did I call him? Just Valjean?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Jean Valjean.
Jean Valjean. There you go.
Yeah, it's not Jean, it's Jean. And I think that even in a children's film and even in a movie that is significantly shorter than Les Mis, they do such a good job at finding those turns of phrase that really make the audience ask those questions. And so that's why I think at the end of the day, Brad, for me, this is still a huge success of a film. I think we should get into final scores. Why don't you go first, Brad? This was your first time seeing it, and I'd really like to hear where you're landing on it. You definitely seem a little cooler on it than me, though.
Yeah, I'm just a little bit iffy about the movement in the movie. It just really feels rushed in a lot of ways, like they're just blasting through years and years worth of plot. I really struggle with the Feast of Fools, the Bacchanal. Like, it is brutal, man. For me, the comparison was almost to Tangled, which we watched a little bit ago.
Mm-hmm.
Like, in Tangled, you have the protagonist locked up in a tower, and they leave. And in Tangled, she's rewarded. She makes friends with the guys in the bar, and they help her escape. And Flynn Rider promises to help her. And she goes to the city, and they braid her hair, and she dances. And it's just the coolest thing in the world. Poor Quasimodo goes out, and he gets almost drawn and quartered by this crowd. It's just literally one of the most brutal animated scenes I've ever watched. And then you have just random stuff thrown in there. Like, all of a sudden, my boy Frollo is a horn dog for Esmeralda. And then they never really touch on that again. And this battle for Helm's Deep where they're like bashing down the doors of the church and burning it to the ground. And it just takes so many twists and turns that I just don't feel like they ever really had their footing on what the heck they wanted from this movie. And that is what really caused me to struggle most with this film. I agree with you. It's epic. It's over the top. I wish that more kids' movies would try to take on such big subjects like this one does. But I wish they would do it a little better. It's not a bad film. I genuinely liked it. I'm going to give it a 7.5 out of 10.
Yeah, I totally understand why you would come out to that score. I'm going to give it a way higher score, but I think that even with me giving it a higher score, you have to kind of grapple with the fact of like, this is really heavy material. And I think they did as much as they possibly could with it. But because, you know, this is not a movie for adults. They weren't going for a PG-13. So the most you're going to get is Frollo like getting too close to Esmeralda and sniffing her hair and her going like, what are you trying to do? And then telling him like, I know what you want. And for adults, we're like, oh yeah, well, we do know what he wants. Kids, like, I don't know if that would go over their head or not, or if it would just be something weird that they didn't understand. But the fact of the matter is, they couldn't go any further with that than they did. And I think that's what kind of gets you back to this question of like, if the most you can do is hint at some of these things, are you really doing the text a service? Or are you just kind of dancing around the themes that it really wants to explore? And I think that's a valid question. I think for me, I really just love at the end of the day that A, Disney took its art seriously because it doesn't seem to do that anymore. B, that they put the resources into this to make it just a truly epic movie. And then C, like that they committed to not dumbing it all the way down, that it isn't a movie for 4-year-olds. It's like a movie for 11-year-olds. And I think there's a huge difference there. And I like that they targeted this to a specific group of people. I really appreciate that. They're not going for 4 quadrants here. They're just trying to make the best possible movie they could, given the source material. I'm going to give this movie a 9.5 out of 10. I really enjoyed it.
I knew you were going to do that.
I really enjoyed it, man. I like the gargoyle stuff is really the only stuff that bothers me. And even then I understand why it's included. So we're coming out to an average here of an 8.5 out of 10. Brad, I imagine a lot of people will have seen this movie that listen to our show, but probably not in the last like 10 years. So I'd really like to encourage people to rewatch the movie as an adult, come back and let us know what you think. We would love to hear your thoughts on this movie.
If you want to do that, you can find us on our social medias, which are Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and our handle is @FilmWhiskey.
Or you can find us on our Discord server. There's a link in every one of our show notes. We talk about movies, we talk about whiskey, we shoot the breeze about everything going on in life. Brad and I are on there every single day.
Bob will randomly yell at football coaches who are coaching a game. It's a blast.
Hey, man, I was watching Georgia and Alabama last night, and Kirby was not doing a good job in the first half. So, apparently no one else was watching that game because no one responded to that random comment about running the ball. So, all right, Brad, it's time for us to spin the wheel of fate here. We have Brad's movies put into this randomizer wheel. We're going to pick the next one, but that means that Brad has to make some wheel spinning sounds for us as I press spin here.
Yabba dabba doo, yabba dabba doo, yabba dabba doo.
Oh, Brad, we are watching maybe your favorite movie of all time? According to all the top 5 lists we've ever done.
Don't tell me that you just pulled up on my boy Robert Duvall and Michael Caine.
We're watching Secondhand Lions next week. So join us for that one. Brad, I'm excited to revisit that one. I've only seen it once on your recommendation. So I'm sure I'll have lots of spicy takes.
I'm going to give that movie a 10 out of 10. I love Secondhand Lions. I'm so pumped.
We will be back next Monday with that. But until then, I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And we'll see you next time.